Sounds good.
Good luck.
Good morning, everybody. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next presentation by our Catalyst 300 group. This presentation is titled The Impact of COVID-19 on the Reporting of Child Abuse. And our group from our Applied Innovation Seminar will be presenting on this. Their presentation will be about 20 minutes long, and then we will have a section of question and answer at the end. If you have a question that comes up to you during the presentation, feel free to put it in the Zoom chat and we'll address it at the end of the presentation. So again, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to our group to introduce themselves and tell you about their applied innovation.
All right, good morning, guys. Lainey, Dane, Abby, Eugene, and I have spent the semester working to find a solution to the problem of underreporting of child abuse every day, and especially during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We looked at implementing a virtual survey within the school district of Milwaukee to combat this issue.
So we have chosen to focus on Milwaukee, both for its diversity in race and socioeconomic status, providing many different experiences to focus on. This is also for the fact for its status as a COVID-19 hotspot in Wisconsin, with around 46,835 cases, that is as of November 2nd. Milwaukee rates of domestic violence that have increased during this pandemic. Being the biggest city in Wisconsin, this location would allow us to focus on kids from different racial and socioeconomic backgrounds. So child abuse is a huge issue for children in Milwaukee, and the COVID-19 pandemic is only making this problem harder to spot. This increase in time that children are spending at home is made us realize there is a connection with the increase in child abuse cases across the nation. Many children in the area will be completing their school year online. In the past, the Milwaukee schools have worked to help students facing child abuse, and there are also a few other resources available in their community. So since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a sharp decline in the reporting of child abuse. The Wisconsin Department of Children and Families received just under 4,000 reports of abuse and or neglect in April 2020, which is down from 7,841 in April 2019 and 753 as of April 2018. To compare this, August 2019, which had the lowest number of reports in the last year, still had 5,340 reports of child abuse and or neglect. From this data, we gathered that there has been a change in the amount of cases of abuse being reported since the pandemic. But before COVID-19, there were thousands more cases of abuse and or neglect reported than there have been since the pandemic started changing people's lives dramatically, concluding that the pandemic has affected the number of cases reported. Milwaukee County prosecutors have seen a 15% increase in domestic violence referrals as compared to last year. Despite those reports of child abuse in Wisconsin, the reports actually decreased by 48% from March 11th to the beginning of March 18th, which is right when the COVID-19 pandemic really began to intensify in the Milwaukee area. This is when trends in Milwaukee showed an increase in the domestic violence referrals overall. The weekly reporting of this child abuse actually decreased tremendously as soon as the pandemic started, which causes a large issue as the rates of this abuse being not shown is increasing. But the reporting of it has actually gone down significantly with less contact with actual trusted adults who can report this abuse.
When families are in the middle of hard times, we have seen that domestic abuse is more likely to occur. Now, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, people are finding themselves spending more time at home. This time spent at home during the pandemic has caused families to have increased stress due to job loss and even a reduction of certain resources like social support groups. According to research done by Aberson, a psychologist, due to the pandemic, there are a lack of child support options like daycares and schools, which can cause even more stress on the parents. Aberson has also shown that there are just some of the many factors due to the pandemic that are linked to an increase in domestic abuse throughout the year. On top of these factors, as we get further into the school year, we have noticed that children learning online may have a more difficult time with domestic abuse. Online schooling during the pandemic can cause many more problems, but the biggest one we found was the lack of the ability to report abuse. This is because since the kids are no longer able to see school personnel like teachers, counselors, or other caregivers, they cannot get help if they are in an abusive situation. As shown in the table, school personnel make up 20.5% of the referrals of child abuse. In 2020 so far, Barton from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported that the reporting of child abuse in the whole state of Wisconsin decreased by about 48% in the week of March. This does not mean that the abuse is not happening. We know this because Milwaukee County on its own has seen an increase of 15% in domestic abuse compared to last year. Another problem we have found is the inherent lack of counselors in schools. This is a problem because research has shown that between 70% and 80% of students get their mental health services through schools, and students are 21 times more likely to utilize school-based mental health resources than community-based ones. In order to properly address the issue of reporting child abuse in schools, this issue must also be addressed. Overall, these are a problem because both domestic and child abuse can have a long-lasting effect on children's psyche, which with the proper personnel could be mitigated. Domestic abuse in childhood is linked to a multitude of issues later in life, including increased drug usage, higher medical bills, psychological distress, and more.
So abuse being unchecked is actually very dangerous since childhood abuse has many long-term impacts on children. Some of the studies that we have found are showing a significant relation between childhood abuse and adult psychological impairment. Really a history of one or more multiple forms of abuse, which can lead to more mental health issues, and a combination of childhood physical, emotional, and or sexual abuse is associated with a threefold greater risk of developing PTSD. Additionally, even if the violence is witnessed secondhand, such as parents hurting, yelling at one another, or abuse happening to a sibling, it can still have long-term impacts. Secondary violence exposure is associated with alcohol and marijuana abuse currently. Short-term and in the long term, secondary violence exposure is linked with illicit drug use, like cocaine or heroin. Experiencing abuse in childhood is also significantly associated with the increase in medical bills in the future, mainly for mental health treatment. Overall, abuse can be linked with an increase of between $1,000 to $3,400 more spent. That's per person per year than people who have not abuse. To combat issues, there are currently some solutions that address the reporting of child abuse. Wisconsin's legal solution includes mandatory reporting. So if neglect is suspected, it should be reported by childcare, doctors, or other professions working with children if it is seen or suspected. But that report goes straight to the police or to Child Protection Services. And we did an interview with Kayla Myers, who is a Purdy Elementary School in Port Atkinson, Wisconsin. After our conversation with her, that teachers undergo mandatory meetings on how to spot abuse, and this training specifies that if a teacher suspects child is a victim of abuse or neglect, the teacher must report it to human, and then from there, it would be passed on to a counselor. The counselor also notices these signs of abuse, then the cases reported by the teacher go straight to the police. Information from Rose Nadler from the Waunakee School District was so kind to give us access to a handout given to or her teachers about spotting abuse during the COVID time. The handout gives us a list of signs for different types of abuse, questions to ask students and parents about their home life. However, this is really meant for high schoolers, and altogether there is not really a standardized way and consistent way of hearing from students about how they really are faring. In Milwaukee, there are actually several resource centers available to those who are experiencing any form of domestic and or child abuse. Some of these resource centers include the Sojourner Family Peace Center, the ASHA Project, UMOS Latina Resource Center, and the Milwaukee Center for Children and Youth, which is the MCCY. All of these centers have websites that provides resources for experiencing abuse, such as support, advocacy, and help with restraining orders, as well as physical locations to put on events. This will inform the public about domestic violence and to provide some enrichment programs for the children that may be experiencing this domestic violence. But due to COVID-19, most of these enrichment programs had to be moved virtually because of the fear of possibly spreading COVID-19. But there are also hotlines and advocacy services that are still available to these victims of abuse.
Due to the cognitive development of children, we will be specifically focusing our short-term solution on grades 2nd through 5th and the age ranges of 7 to 11. This is because research conducted by Borgers on children and surveys concluded that children younger than 7 do not respond well to surveys. Our solution is simple but contains multiple stages. Stage 1 is where we will give a survey to the students that is short and interactive, taking no more than 15 minutes of their time every 1 to 2 months, depending on the size of the school and how many counselors and child psychologists are present. The time frame is based partially on when child services check in on the children in their care, which is about every 6 weeks. From then we move on to stage 2, where the surveys are collected and the data and any red flag concerns are reviewed by the designated staff representing the students. From there are 2 avenues that we can go. Be warranted from other things than abuse, we proceed to stage 3. But if for some reason the reviewing committee believes there's significant reason that there's evidence of the child being mistreated, we move straight to the final stage. Stage 3 proceeds with the guidance counselors or school psychologists having a meeting with the students to gain a better understanding of what the red flags truly signify. They will use open-ended questions because they cannot directly ask if students are being abused. If the counselors or psychologists believe then that there is enough evidence that the child is being mistreated, we'll move to the final stage. The final stage can occur at any time the staff believes any red flags are significant of abuse to children. This is where Child Protective Services or the police would be called into. This is only a mock-up of our survey, as we are not professionals on the psychological behaviors of children. Some of our questions are about the current day of the student because we want to know how they feel while they're taking the survey. Other questions like, do you like being at home for school, and what is your favorite thing about school from home, are designed to get a sense of how the children feels while doing school online. While questions like, are you home alone during the school day, and is there someone at home who can help you with your homework, are targeted to view the atmosphere of the learning at home. And as you will notice throughout the survey, we use simple words and pictures while also trying to avoid negative phrasing so that students can better understand what we are asking and to express their emotions in a different way while also keeping them engaged. We decided to do a survey because research done by Borgers has shown that online surveys have a better response rate than paper ones, averaging only 5.7% of missing data for computer surveys versus 14.1% of missing data for paper surveys in this age range. So even when school resumes in person, online surveys can still continue and help given that we can create the survey so that all questions must be answered before the site will accept the form is complete. In the long term, our survey can be used at home or at school, and it is a more standardized way for schools to conduct their health and wellness checks to their students, while also being simple enough to allow for the consistency of the checkups. The simple setup also allows our survey to be used for many years with only minor adjustments as we gain more knowledge on the psychological indicators of the Waunakee School District and other school counselors. We found out that most schools conduct adequate training on the physical indicators of abuse. But in the future, we plan to have and allow staff to conduct an in-depth training on the psychological indicators of abuse. This will allow personnel to not only notice the visible signs of abuse, but the signs that can't be seen by the naked eye. This would widen the efficiency of stopping abuse before it gets out of hand and allow counselors to gain help so that they're not overwhelmed from all the students they see every day. And even when children go back to in-person schooling, there's often a scarcity of resources addressed to mental health impacts experiencing abuse. So our last part of the solution in the long term is to deal with the inherent lack of access to counselors and psychologists in schools. This is because during the 2014 and 2015 academic year in Wisconsin, the student to counselor ratio was 467 students to one counselor. This is also almost double the recommended ratio of 250 students to one counselor. This shows that counselors are being stretched across a large number of students, which is detrimental to the students because research has shown that counselors help the student maintain better mental health and a positive school climate, and they're essential for consulting with students and helping deem if there's reasonable suspicion of abuse. Together, this shows that there's a high demand for mental health professionals, but there's not enough in Wisconsin to fulfill the needs. To mitigate this, we would like to go through the government to increase the budget, and the most effective way to do that is to influence it by lobbying for a raised budget to schools. Overall, our long-term solution increases our chances in stopping abuse by educating our teachers in more invisible indicators, while giving schools a standardized and better tool to check in on students. With the help of the government, our solution will allow schools to hire more counselors and psychologists to help notify personnel of any indicators observed from students, while also helping students to maintain better mental health and have a more positive outlook in school. In order to implement our solution, we'll be working with the Milwaukee School District, some nonprofit organizations, and lobbying for the government to increase the budget of schools. Within the schools, we will continue to use teachers and staff to be the first line in spotting the psychological indicators of abuse. Guidance counselors and school psychologists will be used to give extra insight on determining what is considered reasonable suspicion and what is caused by other factors. We will work with nonprofit organizations like the Milwaukee Center for Children and Youth, the ASHA Project, United Migrant Opportunity Service, and Sojourner Family Center to help with the planning and creating of our survey and presentation that will be used to train teachers on how to notice the psychological signs of abuse students give off. Since these nonprofit organizations are well-versed in working with victims of abuse, they will have a good insight into some of the warning signs of abuse in young children. It is also our a strong sense of community formed from working together to help curb the issue of abuse. The longest part of our solution involves lobbying in politics to get the government to increase school budgets in order for them to hire more guidance counselors and school psychologists. We know this will take a while because in the past, school budgets have been cut in favor of tax cuts. In order to make this work, we have calculated that in order to hire one counselor and one psychologist in every public school in Milwaukee County, it would cost roughly $20 million.
Some of the possible barriers that we foresee when implementing our solution is that parents will not allow students to take the survey. Surveys of this nature need to have informed parental consent in order to follow the ethical guidelines set by the American Psychological Association. In order to get consent while still trying to reach a wide range of students, we plan on taking what's called a hard approach or an opt-out approach to getting parental consent. This approach is where the parents sign if they do not want their kid participating in the survey. This approach overall has better participation rates than having parents opt in to their kid taking the survey. Our short-term solution will be relatively cheap to implement because, like our example survey, it could be done with resources that schools already have access to. However, if we need school psychologist appointments to finalize a uniform survey, it would to be used in the Milwaukee School District. These would cost approximately $90 to $100, which would be paid for by the nonprofit organizations. There could also be a cost associated with the training for teachers and the cost to hire more on-staff school psychologists and counselors, which is about $20 million, which equates to only about a 0.07% increase in the Wisconsin education budget. Despite the high cost, counselors and psychologists are necessary for a high-functioning school environment. Counselors and psychologists undergo in-depth training on assessing the needs of children and providing counseling services to them. This makes them well-suited for hosting meetings to detect the psychological and emotional cues children give off that signal an abusive home life situation. Overall, counselors and psychologists are essential for the implementation and success of our solution. We believe that our solution is the most practical way to monitor students and to get insight into their well-being, whether classes are in person or online. Despite the drawbacks to our solutions, there are many reasons to hope it will succeed. Our solution is fairly low cost for the short term, and it is easy to implement into school districts. It will allow for a more direct line of communication between students and trusted adults who can help them out if they need it. While we originally developed this solution to be effective in combating the issues of an inability to report child abuse during the COVID-19 pandemic, this solution can extend far beyond that time frame. Even when in-person learning is happening as things were before COVID, there were no consistent check-ins to make sure that a child was not in an abusive situation. This is because even before COVID, public schools had a hard time spotting abuse since schools mainly rely on teachers to see physical signs of abuse. However, it can be difficult to assess a child's well-being and speculate on their home life as not all abuse is physical. Our solution offers up a consistent way to check up on a child's well-being and allow kids to communicate any issues that they're having at home in order for school staff to easily and confidently report abuse. Thank you guys for listening to our presentation. Do you have any questions for us?
Thank you very much. Yes, we have time for questions. So again, you feel free to enter a question in the chat or unmute yourself and ask verbally.
Since things are a little quiet, I was wondering if you think you would have pushback from the teenagers themselves who might see these questions sort of like intrusive in their private life, or possibly a sort of survey fatigue if you do that every other month?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that is part of our survey is that we are targeting a very young age group, so ages 7 through 11. So in the hopes of that, we are hoping that we will not get that sort of pushback since children of that age are very likely to want to please authority, and so they'd be more willing to fill this out. And the other thing, sorry, what was the second part of your question? Oh, the fatigue, sorry. So we are hoping to avoid that fatigue in part by having it be so spaced out. It is only happening every like 1 to 2 months. But also we are hoping that this will not happen and that the consistency of having these surveys will help to determine abuse, because if there are consistent red flags, that would be indicator that something is going on with a child's home life situation.
Thank you. Looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. One is, have you considered possible modifications for ways to assess children younger than second grade? And if so, what do you think those might look like?
So when we originally developed our solution, we wanted it to be applicable to all of the elementary school ages, so kindergarten through 5th grade. However, what we quickly realized was that it's just very difficult to assess children younger than 2nd grade just because they can't really read very well the questions in the survey and then respond with a whole lot of accuracy to what their home life situation is actually like. So in the future, we would consider looking at possible ways to modify it in order to make it more applicable to younger age groups. But as of right now, our survey is mainly for older.
Our hope is also that what we said in the long term was to train the teachers on the psychological indicators of abuse. So that would also help with the younger age groups. It's not something that would only go for the grades 2nd through 5th.
And then also through elementary school, they would actually need parental consent to take these surveys. So we had to start focusing on age groups where they didn't necessarily need the parental consent to do it. They could just take it like a normal survey, like surveys we have taken in high school by ourselves while we were in class.
All right, thank you. There's another question in the chat. Is there a way to survey students, or I guess address students, who don't have the means to participate in virtual learning during COVID-19? Problems with internet, no computer, etc.
So what we found through our research with that is that since we're focusing on Milwaukee in general, we looked at what they're doing for internet for those students, and they had a really great program. So students that normally wouldn't have internet access or computers at home, they were able to receive hotspots and technology from the schools. So kids that were enrolled in public schools would, in theory, all have adequate computer access.
Yes, and legally they are also, all schools are required to, during the pandemic, to give internet access. So unless they're, not following the law, they should have it.
Good. I think we might have time for one more question, and then we do have an 11 o'clock presentation coming up. Any other questions? All right, if not, please join me in congratulating our group for having completed their presentation. Thank you very much for sharing what you've learned with us and your applied innovation as well. So again, a big thanks to Abby, Sophie, Eugene, Dane, and Lainey. Thanks, everybody. And again, I'd encourage you all to join one of the sessions that start at 11 o'clock. You can find the link on the college website. Thank you.
Yes. Done.
We did it.
Even with the cutouts, it was still.
Yeah.
Can we just leave then? Are we done?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Good job, guys.
Good job. We're not meeting anymore.
Yeah.
Good job on this
On
whole
Monday,
semester.
we're meeting with Maynard.
Oh, we are meeting with
I will
Maynard.
be there.
Okay, we'll see each other on Monday.
So this is goodbye for me.
Recorded.